The crisp autumn air hung heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth as I pulled up to my lake cabin that fateful Friday evening. The sun dipped low over the water, painting the ripples in hues of orange and gold, a serene backdrop that belied the storm brewing just beyond the tree line. I'd inherited this place from my grandfather, modest A-frame nestled on the shores of Lake Evergreen. It's far enough from the city to feel like an escape, but close enough to the whispering pines. Community to fall under the iron fist of its homeowners. Association. For years, I'd tolerated their petty rules. No boats left on the dock after dusk. Grass trimmed to exactly 2 inches, and heaven forbid you plant a non-native flower. But tonight was different. Tonight I had a meeting that could change everything. And the last thing I needed was interference from the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer, Karen Wilkins. I parked my SUV in the gravel driveway, the tires crunching like bones underfoot, and glanced at my watch. 7:15 p.m. The State Attorney General, Elena Vasquez, was due any minute. We'd connected through a mutual friend in the legal world. I was a mid-level prosecutor in the Capitol, specializing in environmental fraud cases, and she'd reached out about a sensitive matter involving corruption in rural developments, like the one creeping up on our lake. It wasn't just professional, it felt personal. Developers had been eyeing Lake Evergreen for years, pushing to turn our quiet haven into a luxury resort strip. If what Elena suspected was true, the HOA board, including Karen, might be tangled. In kickbacks, my heart raced at the thought. This could be my big break, a chance to protect the legacy Grandpa left me. But secrecy was keen. One could know she was here. As I unlocked the door, the cabin's familiar creak welcomed me like an old friend. The interior was simple, knotty pine walls, a stone fireplace, and windows framing the lake like living paintings. I lit a fire to ward off the chill, the flames crackling to life as I set out coffee and documents on the scarred oak table. My phone buzzed a text from Elena. 5 minutes out? Discreet as disgust. I exhaled, trying to steady the knot of anticipation in my stomach. What if this went south? What if the evidence wasn't enough? Emotions surged through me, a mix of hope for justice and fear of the backlash. Little did I know the real drama was about to unfold, not from the developers, but from the nosy busybody next door. Karen Wilkins had been a thorn in my side since I first claimed the cabin 5 years ago. She was the HOA president, a retired accountant in her late 50s, with a perm that defied gravity and a clipboard that seemed surgically attached to her hand. Her house, 2 lots down, was a monument to conformity. White picket fence, manicured. Lawn and seasonal decorations swapped out with military precision. But Karen's real hobby was meddling. She'd fined me for leaving my kayak out once, reported my compost bin as a health hazard, and even tried to ban my annual 4th of July barbecue because the smoke disturbed the wildlife. I'd heard whispers from neighbors how she'd bullied the Millers into selling after their dog barked too much, or how she'd inspected the Johnsons' garage without permission. She ruled Whispering Pines like a petty tyrant, and tonight her reign was about to collide with something far bigger than her ego. I paced the living room, reviewing the files in my mind. Elena had hinted at emails linking HOA funds to a shell company owned by the developers. If we could prove it, indictments could follow. The sound of an engine purred outside, and I peered through the curtains. A nondescript black sedan pulled up. No plates visible, standard for high-profile visits. Lena stepped out, tall and poised in a tailored coat, her dark hair pulled back severely. She carried a briefcase, her expression all business as she approached. "Alex," she greeted me with a firm handshake at the door. "Thanks for hosting. This needs to stay off the radar." "Absolutely," I replied, ushering her in. "Coffee's hot. Let's dive in." We settled at the table, the fire casting flickering shadows. Across the room, Elena opened her briefcase, spreading out redacted documents. These came from a whistleblower. "Look here, transfers from the HOA account to Evergreen Holdings. 8 match the board meetings Karen chaired." My pulse quickened. She's been pushing for those new docs. Said it was for community enhancement. But if it's tied to bribes, ... Exactly, Elena said, her voice low. "We need more. Your local intel could seal it." As we pored over the papers, discussing strategies, a distant rustle caught my ear. Dismissed it as wind in the trees, but unease prickled my skin. The lake was isolated, but Karen had a habit of patrolling at odd hours. Suspense, built like a gathering storm. Every creak of the cabin floorboards made me jump. Elena noticed. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just neighbors," I muttered, forcing a smile. We delved deeper, Elena outlining a plan to subpoena records. Welled up in greed threatening our slice of paradise. Gratitude for this alliance. Grandpa had fought loggers in the 70s to keep this land pristine. Now it was my turn. But as the clock ticked toward 8 p.m., sharper noise pierced the night. Footsteps on the gravel path leading to my door. I froze. "Wait here," I whispered to Elena, creeping to the window. Through the gap in the curtains, I saw a Hurricane flashlight in hand, marching toward the cabin like a one-woman SWAT team. She wore her signature windbreaker emblazoned with HOA enforcement, and her face was set in that familiar scowl. What the hell was she doing here? Had she seen Elena's car? My heart hammered. If she interrupted now, it could blow everything, Alex. Karen's voice barked from outside, sharp as a whip. "I know you're in there. Open up." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Friend of yours?" "Not exactly," I hissed, mind racing. Suspense coiled tight. Should I ignore her? Confront her? The doorknob rattled and my blood ran cold. She wouldn't. But then, with a crash, the door flew open. Karen had picked the lock. No, wait, she'd used her master key, the one the HOA issued for emergencies. She burst in, eyes wild, brandishing her clipboard like a shield. "What in God's name is going on here?" she demanded, her gaze sweeping the room. I saw a suspicious vehicle, and as HOA president, I have a duty too. She stopped dead, her words choking off as her eyes landed on Elena. The Attorney General sat, composed, arms crossed, an amused glint in her eye. The room fell silent, save for the pop of the fire. Karen's face drained of color, shifting from righteous indignation to dawning horror. She didn't recognize Elena immediately, but the air of authority was unmistakable. This is a routine check," Karen stammered, clutching her clipboard tighter. "There have been reports of unauthorized gatherings. HOA Rule 47.2 clearly states unauthorized." I interjected, anger bubbling over. All the pent-up frustration from years of her harassment surged forth. "This is my property, Karen. You can't just barge in." Lena's voice cut through, calm but still edged. "Actually, ma'am, breaking and entering is a criminal offense, even with a key, without probable cause or a warrant." Karen blinked finally. "Focusing on Elena? Who are you? This doesn't concern you." "Alex, you know the rules?" "Oh, it very much concerns me," Elena said, standing slowly. Elena said, pulled out her badge, the gold seal gleaming. "Elena Vasquez, State Attorney General." "And you are..." The color returned to Karen's face in a rush of red. "Attorney General," she squeaked, her clipboard slipping from her fingers. It clattered to the floor, papers scattering like confetti. Suspense peaked in that moment, the air thick with the weight of her mistake. Would she bolt? Apologize? Double down? I thought. "There was a break-in," Karen lied weakly, backing toward the door. "The car looked suspicious. I was protecting the community. By invading a private residence," Lena pressed, her tone laced with quiet menace. I could see the wheels turning in her mind. This intrusion might be the break we needed. A personal angle to the corruption probe. Emotion overwhelmed me, a heady mix of vindication and pity. Karen had terrorized us all, but seeing her crumble like this stirred unexpected sympathy. Still, suspense lingered. What would Elena do next? "Ms. Wilkins," Elena continued, "I'm here on official business, but now you've made yourself part of it. Sit down. We need to talk." Karen hesitated, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Then, defeated, she slumped into a chair. The night was far from over. As the fire dwindled to embers, the interrogation began. Elena, ever the professional, laid out the evidence we'd been discussing. Karen's denials came fast at first. I don't know anything about kickbacks. But cracks appeared. Under Elena's relentless questioning, turns out Karen had been receiving consulting fees from the developers. Funneled through the HOA, it wasn't just about rules. It was about lining her pockets. By midnight, Elena had enough for a preliminary report. Karen left in tears, promising cooperation in exchange for leniency. As Elena packed up, she clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled that well, Alex. This could be the start of something big." Driving away, I watched the lake's dark waters reflect the stars. Peace returned, but with a new-edged justice on the horizon. Karen's reign was over. My cabin felt truly mine again. Word count, 2,550. Wait, that's not right. Let me expand. To hit the mark. The story above is a summary outline, but to reach exactly 2,550 words, I'll flesh it out fully. The crisp autumn air hung heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. As I pulled up to my lake cabin that fateful Friday evening, the sun dipped low over the water, painting the ripples in hues of orange and gold, a serene backdrop that belied the storm brewing just beyond the tree line. I'd inherited this place from my grandfather, a modest A-frame nestled on the shores of Lake Evergreen, far enough from the city to feel like an escape but close enough to the Whispering Pines community to fall under the iron fist of its homeowners association. For years, I'd tolerated their petty rules. No boats left on the dock after dusk. Grass trimmed to exactly 2 inches, and heaven forbid you plant a non-native flower. But tonight was different. Tonight I had a meeting that could change everything. And the last thing I needed was interference from the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer. Karen Wilkins. My hands gripped the steering wheel a bit tighter as I recalled our last run-in. Just 2 weeks ago, Karen had marched up to my door with a citation for excessive leaf accumulation in my yard. "Accumulates fall," Karen, I'd said through gritted teeth. "Leaves fall." She'd huffed, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. "Rules are rules, Alex. This is for the good of the community." The community she spoke of was a loose collection of 20 cabins, most owned by weekenders like me, but Karen treated it like her personal fiefdom. Her husband, a quiet man who rarely spoke, seemed to exist only to nod in agreement. Rumors swirled that she ran him ragged too, shaking off the memory. I parked my SUV in the gravel driveway, the tires crunching like bones underfoot, and glanced at my watch. 7:15 p.m. The state attorney general, Elena Vasquez, was due any minute. We'd connected through a mutual friend in the legal world. I was a mid-level prosecutor in the capital, specializing in environmental fraud cases, and she'd reached out about a sensitive matter involving corruption in rural developments, like the one creeping up on our lake. It wasn't just professional. It felt personal. Developers had been eyeing Lake Evergreen for years, pushing to turn our quiet haven into a luxury resort strip. Grandpa had bought this land in the 60s, building the cabin with his own hands after serving in Vietnam. It was his sanctuary, and now mine. If what Elena suspected was true, the HOA board, including Karen, might be tangled in kickbacks to approve zoning changes. My heart raced at the thought. This could be my big break, a chance to protect the legacy Grandpa left me. But secrecy. Was key no one could know she was here, especially not Karen, who had eyes everywhere? As I unlocked the door, the cabin's familiar creak welcomed me like an old friend. The interior was simple. Knotty pine walls adorned with faded photos of Grandpa fishing, a stone fireplace stacked with logs, and large windows framing the lake like living paintings. I tossed my keys on the counter and lit a fire to ward off the evening chill, the flames crackling to life as they devoured the kindling. The warmth spread quickly, chasing away the dampness. I set out a pot of coffee, its aroma mingling with the wood smoke, and arranged the documents on the scarred oak table in the center of the room. They were printouts of emails and financial records I gathered discreetly. Nothing incriminating yet, but enough to spark Elena's interest. My phone buzzed a text from Elena. 5 minutes out. Discreet as disgust. Exhaled slowly, trying to steady the knot of anticipation twisting in my stomach. What if this went south? What if the evidence wasn't enough to warrant her involvement? Emotion surged through me, a mix of hope for justice in fear of the backlash from powerful interests. The developers had deep pockets, and I'd heard stories of whistleblowers facing harassment or worse, but I pushed the doubts aside. This was for Grandpa, for the lake. For the community Karen purported to protect, but was likely betraying. I paced the living room, reviewing the files in my mind. Elena had hinted at emails linking HOA funds to a shell company owned by Evergreen Holdings. The very developers circling our waters. Dates matched board meetings, transfers that looked like bribes disguised as consulting fees. If we could prove it, indictments could follow, and the project might be halted. The sound of an engine purred outside, low and unobtrusive. I peered. Through the curtains, my breath catching, a nondescript black sedan pulled up. No visible plate, standard protocol for high-profile visits to avoid tracking. Elena stepped out, tall and poised in a tailored wool coat that screamed authority. Without ostentation, her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she carried a slim briefcase. Her expression all business as she scanned the surroundings before approaching the door. "Alex," she greeted me with a firm handshake, her grip strong and assured. "Thanks for hosting this. Need to keep it off the radar, no leaks." "Absolutely," I replied, ushering her inside and closing the door quickly. "Coffee's hot. Let's dive right in." We settled at the table, the fire casting flickering shadows. Across the walls, dancing like ghosts from the past, Elena opened her briefcase with a click, spreading out redacted documents pages of bank statements, email chains, and memos. "These came from a whistleblower inside the company," she explained, her voice low and measured. "Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Look here at the transfers. From the Whispering Pines HOA account to an offshore entity linked to Evergreen Holdings. The amounts are small, but consistent, and the dates align perfectly with the board's approval of preliminary zoning requests." My pulse quickened as I scanned the papers. Karen chaired those meetings. She's been pushing hard for new docks and access roads, calling it community enhancement. But if these are bribes— "Precisely," Elena said, tapping a highlighted line. "We need corroboration. Your local and Telenian usual behavior from the board, unexplained wealth, could seal it. Have you noticed anything?" I nodded, recalling Karen's new SUV last spring. Far fancier than her accountant's pension should allow. She's upgraded her lifestyle. And she's been unusually aggressive with fines, like she's trying to fund something. Last month, she hit the entire row with penalties for non-compliant. "Mailboxes." Elena leaned back, steepling her fingers. Classic sign of money laundering through association dues. "If we can tie her directly, we have a case for racketeering." As we delved deeper, discussing potential subpoenas and witness interviews, a distant rustle caught my ear. I dismissed it as the wind rustling through the pines, or perhaps a deer wandering too close. But an unease prickled at the back of my neck, a sixth sense honed from years in the courtroom. The lake was isolated, but Karen had a habit of patrolling at odd hours. Her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a searchlight, suspense built like a gathering storm. Every creak of the cabin's old floorboards made me jump. Every shadow seemed to shift with malicious intent. Elena noticed my distraction. "Everything all right, Alex? You seem tense?" "Yeah, just nosy neighbors," I muttered, forcing a smile and refilling our coffees. "Nothing to worry about," he continued, Elena outlining a timeline for the investigation. Emotion welled up inside me, anger at the greed threatening to despoil our slice of paradise. Gratitude for this unexpected alliance with one of the state's most powerful figures. Grandpa had fought loggers in the 70s to keep this land pristine, teaching me to fish and respect nature's balance. Now it was my turn to fight, and with Elena's help, we might win. But as the clock ticked toward 8 p.m., a sharper noise pierced the night. The crunch of footsteps on the gravel path leading to my door. Not the soft pad of an animal, but deliberate human steps. I froze, my hand midway to a document. "Wait here," I whispered to Elena, creeping to the window with my heart pounding in my ears. Through a narrow gap in the curtains, I saw Karen Wilkins' flashlight in one hand, clipboard in the other, marching toward the cabin like a one-woman invasion force. She wore her signature windbreaker emblazoned with HOA enforcement in bold letters, and her face was set in that familiar scowl of self-righteous determination. What the hell was she doing here at this hour? Had she spotted Elena's car from her window? My mind raced with possibilities, suspense coiling tight in my chest. If she interrupted now, it could blow the entire operation, word would spread. Evidence might vanish. Alex? Karen's voice barked from outside, sharp as a whip crack in the still night. I know you're in there. Open up this instant. Lena raised an eyebrow, her composure unbroken. Friend of yours? Not exactly, I hissed. My mind spinning. Should I ignore her, hoping she'd go away? Confront her on the porch? The doorknob rattled violently, and my blood ran cold. No, she wouldn't dare. But then, with a jarring click and a crash, the door flew open. Karen had used her HOA-issued master key, the one meant for emergencies like fires or floods, not her. Personal vendettas. Shh. Burst into the room, eyes wild with triumph, brandishing her clipboard like a weapon. What in God's name is going on here? She demanded, her voice echoing off the pine walls. I saw a suspicious vehicle pull up, and as HOA president, I have a duty to investigate potential trespassers. This community has standards, and she stopped dead in her tracks, her words choking off as her gaze swept the room and landed on Elena. The Attorney General sat there, composed as ever, arms crossed over her chest, with an amused glint in her dark eyes. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the pop and hiss of the dying fire. Karen's face drained of all color, shifting from righteous indignation to a dawning horror that was almost palpable. She didn't recognize Elena immediately, who would expect the state's top law enforcer in a remote cabin. But the air of unshakable authority was impossible to ignore. No, this is a routine safety check, Karen stammered, her voice cracking as she clutched her clipboard tighter, her knuckles turning white. There have been reports of unauthorized gatherings in the area. HOA Rule 47.2 clearly states that all visitors must be registered with the board in advance and unauthorized. I interjected, my anger bubbling over like a pot left too long. On the stove, all the pent-up frustration from years of her relentless harassment surged forth, hot and unfiltered. This is my private property, Karen. Can't just barge in like you own the place. Elena's voice cut through the tension, calm, but laced with an edge of steel that made even me straighten up. Actually, ma'am, what you've just done is breaking and entering. Even with a key, entering a private residence without permission, probable cause, or a warrant is a criminal offense under state law. Karen blinked rapidly, finally focusing fully on Elena as if seeing her for the first time. Who are you to tell me about the law? This doesn't concern you. Alex, you know the rules better than this. Oh, very much concerns me, Elena said, rising slowly from her chair with the grace of a predator. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her badge, the gold seal of the State Attorney General's office gleaming under the firelight. Elena Vasquez, State Attorney General, and you are? The color that had drained from Karen's face returned in a violent rush of crimson, her cheeks flushing as if slapped. Attorney, General, she squeaked, her voice barely above a whisper. The clipboard slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering to the floor and sending papers scattering like autumn leaves in a gust. Suspense peaked in that frozen moment, the air thick with the weight of her monumental blunder. Would she bolt out the door, fall to her knees in apology? Or, true to form, double down on her delusion? I thought there was a break-in, Karen. Lead weakly, her eyes darting toward the exit as she took a faltering step back. The car looked suspicious, no plates or anything. I was just protecting the community. It's my responsibility. By invading a private residence during a confidential meeting? Elena pressed, her tone now laced with quiet menace that sent a shiver down my spine. I could see the wheels turning in her sharp mind. This unexpected intrusion might be the break. We needed a personal angle to leverage in the corruption probe. Karen's presence here, uninvited and aggressive, could demonstrate her overreach and tied directly to the misuse of HOA authority. Emotion overwhelmed me. In waves, a heady mix of vindication that made my chest swell, mingled with an unexpected twinge of pity. Karen had terrorized the neighborhood for years, turning what should have been a peaceful retreat into a battleground of petty tyrannies. But seeing her crumble like this, her perm wilting under the pressure, stirred something human in me. Still, the suspense lingered, hanging in the air like smoke. What would Elena do next? Arrest her on the spot? Use this to flip her as a witness? Ms. Wilkins, Elena continued, using Karen's last name with deliberate formality as she gestured. To the empty chair across the table, I suggest you sit down. We need to have a conversation. Now. Karen hesitated, her eyes wide as saucers, glancing between me, Elena, and the open door, as if calculating her escape. Then, with a defeated slump of her shoulders, she shuffled forward and sank into the chair, her windbreaker rustling like defeated flags. The night was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, as the fire dwindled to glowing embers, casting long shadows that seemed to mock Karen's diminished stature. The impromptu interrogation unfolded. Lena, ever the consummate professional, laid out the evidence we'd been discussing mere minutes before. She started gently, almost conversationally, but with an undercurrent of authority that brooked no nonsense. Ms. Wilkins, we're investigating allegations of financial improprieties involving the Whispering Pines HOA and certain development interests. Care to explain these transfers? Karen's denials came fast and furious at first, her voice regaining some of its bluster. I don't know anything about kickbacks or whatever you're implying. The HOA is run above board, every penny accounted for. But Elena was relentless, sliding documents across the table one by one. Then how do you explain the $5,000 deposit into your personal account the day after approving the dock expansion? Or the emails from Evergreen Holdings thanking you for your cooperation? Cracks began to appear in Karen's facade, her hands twisting in her lap as sweat beaded on her forehead. It was ... consulting fees. Legitimate work. I advised them on community needs. Consulting. I couldn't help but scoff, my emotion boiling over again. You've been finding us left and right to pad the budget, all while pocketing bribes to sell. Out the lake, Grandpa would roll in his grave. Karen shot me a glare, but it lacked her usual fire. You don't understand, Alex. The developments bring jobs, improvements. I was doing what's best for your bank account, Elena interjected smoothly. We've got the paper trail. Cooperation now could mean leniency later. The suspense built as Karen wavered, tears welling in her eyes. Finally, she broke. Fine. It started smaller gift here, a favor there. But they promised more if I pushed the approvals through. I didn't think it would hurt anyone. By midnight, Elena had extracted enough details for a preliminary report. Names, dates, amounts. Karen left in a daze, sobbing quietly as she promised full cooperation in exchange for immunity considerations. I walked her to the door, a strange pity softening my anger. Why, Karen? You had everything here. She paused on the threshold, the night air cool and unforgiving. Power, Alex. It gets to you. As her footsteps faded into the darkness, Elena packed up her briefcase. You handled that remarkably well, she said, clapping me on the shoulder. This intrusion, it's gold, ties her directly to abuse of power. We move fast now. I nodded, exhaustion mingling with triumph. Thanks for coming. This means everything. She smiled faintly. Justice isn't always clean, but it's worth it. Stay safe. Watching her sedan disappear down the road, I stood on the porch, the lakes. Dark waters lapping gently at the shore under a canopy of stars. Peace had returned to Whispering Pines, but with a new edge of horizon, bright with the promise of accountability. Karen's reign of terror was over, the developer's schemes unraveling. My cabin felt truly mine again, a sanctuary reclaimed. But in the quiet, a lingering suspense remained. What other secrets lurked in the shadows of our little community? For now, though, the lake whispered its approval, and I slept soundly for the first time in months.